Hello, yeah, it's Thursday. Yeah, I have nothing to say about Thursday whatsoever. This week is just going to sort of saunter off, exit stage right, pursued by bear, no doubt. Anyway, just to recap on a few things that I've been saying over the last, few days, if nothing else. Did finally get hold of the JL Partners data on the Palestine thing, what the Daily Telegraph was running with at the weekend. And it was published, as far as I can make out, basically on Wednesday, which is actually 3 whole days after it was reported in the Telegraph. And if you do look at the numbers, a link down below if you fancy, you get to see that, it's a very mixed picture and basically asking people quite complex questions about what might happen in the future if Palestine is going to be recognised is probably a bit of a waste of time. Anyway, they've done the classic thing that they will do because it's what they're paid for, both the Telegraph and the JL Partners, obviously, of lumping people that don't really know or care or understand very much into people that are definitely don't like Hamas. There isn't necessarily a great deal about it in the main body necessarily per se about Palestine, because it does kind of steer you towards Hamas, which isn't necessarily about a Palestinian state, is it? Still, never mind that. That's all in the past and we can forget about it. And there has been quite a bit of that. There was snuck out one of the things that's actually happening in the Telegraph. They was put these kind of these stories in their business or money section. We've got the graphs, Sam Ashworth-Hayes, the graphs that show how Britain missed out on 2 decades of pay rises, which, if you think about it or read it or something, you will probably find that the basic things that you've been feeling for the last decade or so are actually true, in the sense that if you're an older person, you've basically seen your pay stagnate, and if you're a younger person, you've basically seen your career stalled or at least put on a kind of very, very low motor. So apparently us, the proles, the ordinary people, have been basically shafted for at least the last decade, or indeed possibly 2 decades. Still, that's never mind. We won't have a discussion about that. We'll have a discussion about other things, which we'll come along onto in a minute. Yes, I see the Daily Telegraph occasionally is a newspaper and will actually publish things that are news, but it of course doesn't make the news, because that's the wrong things to be talking about, isn't it? Because then you might have to do something about it, and that would never do, would it? I mean, there are other things we need to do things about. I mean, we could, if we wanted to, for example, go for a radical kind of Argentina-style solution to things, which Kemi Badenoch, if no one else in this country, probably for the most of the Reform Party as well, are quite keen on. I know that Rupert Lowe is as well, except, of course, the bad news this week was that, yes, Argentina is basically becoming the basket case, because you can squeeze inflation out of an economy, but then you tend to squeeze, the economy out of the economy, as Margaret Thatcher perhaps found, or maybe Chile found, or all of those other places where neoliberalism hasn't exactly worked. Hence the, 2 decades of lost pay for me, you, and the entirety of the rest of the population, apart from that top 5%, who of course are very important, and we'll come on to them in a minute. But yes, the White House have decided they're probably going to bail out Argentina. Why? Number 1, because he's a mate, and number 2, because it just looks bad. After all, if you have Elon Musk running around the stage in a ketamine haze with a chainsaw, you're really going to want to kind of pretend that it might all have been for some reason or other. Meanwhile, people in Argentina can just put up with yet more of the same, because of course with a bailout will come inevitably the longer period of austerity, which will definitely work and certainly will it's hard to say, isn't it? Result in 2 decades of lost earnings for just ordinary people, but maybe not Don, and maybe not Millie himself. And what do we get served up? Well, what we get served up is things like this from Jeremy Warner, a man who gets paid a great deal of money to write absolute tosh and bunkum, or, if you fancy in a more technical term, bunkum and tosh. There is a deadly tax heading for Britain. Oh dear God, it just sounds like a bad storm, doesn't it? Yes, levies on the ultra-rich harm incentives and economic growth and are unlikely to raise much money. Well, bearing in mind the sort of 2 decades of lost earnings, I'm not quite sure about the economic growth thing because we haven't had any, have we, for what? I don't know, roughly 2 decades. Odd that. Well, unless, of course, you're someone like Jeremy and his mates who exist at the top of the pile, who have seen their wealth increase enormously. But we mustn't have a wealth tax because if we have a wealth tax, then presumably we will be even poorer than we are now. Or except, do you know what? And I think a lot of other people, are willing to give that a bit of a punt. You never know, might just work out because, of course, in sort of like non-neoliberal economic circles, or what we might call the real world in terms of actual humanities writings, in terms of history and sociology and things like that, what you end up with is loads and loads of people coming out with the idea that current inequality is unsustainable and will lead to all sorts of really, really bad social problems like the rise of extremism. Not that, of course, we can see things like that in the UK and the USA. Definitely not. But, of course, we won't have any of these kind of things as a discussion in the media because, after all, Jeremy and his mates are all doing rather well and they'd rather like that to be carried on. So we're not going to discuss Argentina, even the next time that Kemi brings it up as a perfectly good model, most definitely. We're not going to discuss Thatcher's legacy, and we're not even going to suggest, possibly, that just maybe, just maybe, a more equitable system like we had in the immediate post-war settlement actually was very, very beneficial for pretty much everybody in society because, after all, that would mean admitting that the last 40 years of the economic dogma and basic political propaganda that we've had to put up with have all been at someone's expense, and various people aren't going to be very comfortable about admitting that. Yes, you might sort of think just on a similar level about perhaps certain Labour politicians from the past, or indeed the current administration, who might find themselves feeling slightly uncomfortable about events in and around the stuff that JL Partners were polling on. Chickens will come home to roost. There will be an awful lot of trouble, and simply ignoring it isn't necessarily a brilliant strategy because, I think Kennedy and other people suggested that if you try and do things like that, it'll bite you on the posterior. Anyway, do have a lovely, lovely, lovely Thursday. If you can do, enjoy the sort of limited sunshine that there is. Although I must admit, my pussycat is sort of prancing around in the sun and is generally a very happy bunny. And suddenly, just on that basis, the world seems a much, much better place. So long as I don't think about things, which I guess is the job of GB News, or indeed Jeremy and the rest of them at the Telegraph. Do have a lovely day.